I was 4 months into my fifth deployment when the email arrived. My name is Logan Briggs, a 42-year-old staff sergeant with the 82nd Airborne Division. On that sweltering Thursday in Kandahar, I sat in the dusty communications tent, barely awake after a 14-hour patrol shift. Our base Wi-Fi was spotty at best, but I'd made it a ritual to check my inbox during downtime, mostly for promotions, updates from the unit, and sometimes a message from my wife. That morning, her name appeared at the top of the screen. Subject, let's be adults about this. I opened the email. 3 sentences. Logan, I've filed for divorce. I've already emptied the joint account and moved out. Let's handle this like adults. Kara. That was it. No warning. No explanation. No goodbye. I blinked, reread it, once, then again. Then I sat there staring at the screen as if more words might materialize. Our marriage, 13 years of it, was terminated in a PDF attachment. I closed the laptop slowly, not slamming it, not even reacting. I stood, walked to the communal showers, let the tepid water run over me, dressed in silence, and went to work like nothing had happened. That night, I returned to my bunk and replied with a single word, understood. Miles Ramsey, my bunkmate, glanced over from his cot, eyes still buried in a dog-eared thriller. You good, Briggs, he asked, not looking up. Just stuff back home, I said. He nodded once. That was it. Military guys know when to leave things alone. But inside, I was vibrating. Here's the thing, I wasn't completely surprised. Not really. The signs had been building like dust collecting on a windowsill. Quiet, steady, almost invisible until the light hit just right. 6 months before this deployment, Kara had changed. Subtle things. She stopped asking how my day was, started working late at the dental clinic where she answered phones, joined a gym but never looked like she broke a sweat. New clothes, new friends, friends I never met, passwords on her phone I never had before. She started saying things like, Melissa's so much happier now that she left Mark, or I just feel like we're in different places. I didn't snoop, didn't follow her. That's not how I operate. My dad raised me to be better than that, think first, then act. But I wasn't blind either. I saw what I saw, so I made moves, quiet ones. I rented a small storage unit across town, moved important documents there, our marriage license, my birth certificate, the deed to the house, which, thanks to the VA loan, was solely in my name, military benefits paperwork, my grandfather's watch, my mother's silverware set, things that couldn't be replaced. Then I opened a second checking account at a different bank, started siphoning a small part of each paycheck there, not enough to trigger alarm bells, but enough to survive if things fell apart. I didn't tell her, I didn't accuse, but I prepared. And now, sitting in that khaki canvas tent in a land so far from home, it might as well have been another planet. I felt a strange sense of calm, because while Kara had blindsided me with a digital dagger, what she didn't know was that I'd already seen the storm coming and I had battened down the hatches. Still, nothing could dull the sharpness of that moment, the quiet death of a marriage through Wi-Fi and cowardice. And the worst part, the way she ended it wasn't even the part that hurt most. It was the fact that she'd moved someone else into our house and the one I'd painted, fixed, upgraded, the one I paid for while she said she needed to find herself, the one where we had quiet dinners, where our dog Scout used to greet me by spinning in circles when I walked in. Now it wasn't our house anymore. It was just hers, and some guy named Derek's. I remember the day I really began to suspect something was wrong. It was 3 months before I shipped out to Kandahar. Kara had come home late again. She'd said she was grabbing drinks with coworkers from the dental office, but when I asked who, she rattled off names I didn't recognize. I smiled, nodded, kissed her on the forehead, but the gears in my head were already turning. Later that night, I watched her scroll through her phone on the couch, giggling at something, fingers typing fast, then the screen dimmed as she turned it face down when I walked by. Small things. things that people like to excuse as normal. But I've been trained to pay attention to patterns. In combat, it's what keeps you alive. Kara started dressing differently. More makeup, shorter skirts, stylish shoes instead of her usual sneakers. I'd ask how her day was and she'd shrug. Same old. No warmth. No curiosity about my own day. She used to ask if I ate enough, if I was sleeping. Now it was just silence and TV. The emotional disconnection was gradual, like a faucet dripping in the background until suddenly the whole floor is soaked. I didn't confront her. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. Instead, I started moving chess pieces on my own. First, the storage unit. I kept the key on my military keychain so it wouldn't look out of place. I rented it under a friend's name, Eli Cartwright, my old army buddy who'd become a lawyer after his discharge. He said I was paranoid. I said I preferred to call it contingency planning. Then came the bank move. I opened an account at Western National Credit Union, small and local, and with no connection to our usual bank, I routed 15% of each direct deposit there. Kara wouldn't notice. She never looked at the full pay stubs anyway. Just the amounts in the shared account. It wasn't about mistrust. It was about insurance. You don't jump out of a plane without a reserve chute. And this marriage, it had turbulence written all over it. Even our conversations had become awkward. She'd once laughed at my army lingo, now she seemed irritated by it. I'd say Roger that, or copy out of habit, and she'd roll her eyes like I was speaking Klingon. She used to be proud of my service, proudly correcting anyone who called me a soldier instead of airborne infantry. Now she just told me I was always gone. That part had stung the most, because I had missed birthdays, anniversaries, hell, I even missed our 10th wedding anniversary because of a last-minute rotation to Iraq. And every time I came back with gifts, with promises, with that hopeful look that maybe things would reset. But they never did. One night, I stood in the garage staring at my workbench, the same one where I'd made Kara a necklace holder out of salvaged wood. She cried when I gave it to her, said it reminded her that even when I was deployed, I was always building something for us. Now it sat in our bedroom, covered in dust, unused. I started noticing names popping up in her conversations. Derek from the gym said, or Jeremy at work mentioned. She dropped them casually, but the repetition was noticeable. I asked once, "Who's Derek again?" "Oh, just a guy from the gym. He's hilarious." She said, breezily. I smiled. "Yeah, maybe we should all get dinner sometime. No offense, babe, but you'd hate him. He's kind of not your style." I didn't press, but I made a mental note, and I kept my distance. The day before deployment, I woke up early, packed my bags, double-checked the documents in the storage unit, and kissed Kara goodbye at the airport. "Stay safe." "Okay," she said. Her arms wrapped around me, but it felt mechanical, like someone going through the motions. Her eyes were dry, not a tear. After 13 years of shared life, she hugged me like a coworker moving to another office. And still, part of me hoped I was wrong, that I was just being overly cautious, that maybe, once I came back, we'd go to counseling, talk things out, take a vacation, rekindle the flame. But deep down I knew the woman who once baked me care packages filled with homemade brownies and handwritten notes was already halfway out the door. She just didn't have the guts to say it until that email came, until she dropped the final blade while I was thousands of miles away, wearing body armor and scanning rooftops for snipers. Kara thought she had blindsided me, but what she didn't know was that I had already written the opening chapter of my own escape plan. And I never start fights, but I finish them. People say your body always knows before your mind does. I felt it in the way Kara looked at me the night before I deployed, like she was already grieving a life she had no intention of returning to. There was no affection in her voice, no subtle clutch in her arms, just a rehearsed line. "Be careful, okay?" I smiled and nodded. "Always am." She didn't say I love you. I didn't ask why. I boarded the transport plane with my gear strapped to my chest and that hollow feeling in my gut. That same feeling you get before a bad jump, the silence before the green light blinks on. When we landed in Kandahar, I dove straight into work. That's the thing about being downrange, no time to think. You eat, sleep, and breathe your mission. Days blur, weeks vanish. But even in the chaos, her distance echoed like a dull thud in the back of my skull. She emailed me once or twice. Short messages, everything's fine. Scout misses you. Then nothing. No care packages, no video calls. Just a strange, cold absence. I didn't press. I buried myself in the job. But I kept thinking back to that morning in 2014 when we first bought the house. It wasn't anything fancy, a modest three-bedroom ranch with a tiny backyard and a squeaky gate. We were in our early 30s, giddy with the kind of energy that makes people paint rooms in bright colors and build shelves without instructions. Kara picked yellow for the kitchen walls, said it made the place feel warm, said it was a happy color. I remember installing ceiling fans while she made iced tea. I remember us dancing barefoot on the hardwood after we moved the furniture in. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what people mean when they talk about building a life. And maybe for a while it was. We had our routines, Saturday morning coffee runs, grocery shopping at that overpriced co-op downtown because she liked their homemade granola, Sunday night binge sessions on Netflix arguing about what to watch. But time is a slow thief. It doesn't take everything at once. Just a little here, a little there. After a few years, our weekends became quieter. She started scrolling through her phone more than she talked. We still had dinner together, but the conversations got shorter. Her laugh came less often. Then came the late nights. At first, she blamed it on dental audits and insurance billing deadlines. You know how it is, she'd say with a tired smile. But I started noticing the signs, unexplained receipts, outfits she hadn't worn before, cologne on the laundry that wasn't mine. I never confronted her. That's not how I operate. It never was. But I watched, and I remembered, and I prepared. After I got the email, after I stared at that single paragraph ending a 13-year bond, I took a shower and geared up for patrol. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I was oddly calm. That's what happens when betrayal finally catches up with reality. You don't explode, you go cold. That night I lay in my bunk staring at the canvas above me. Miles was snoring 2 feet away. Outside, the wind pushed sand through the seams of our tent. I thought about Kara in our kitchen. Was she laughing? Cooking? Had she brought him there already? I tried to push the thought away, but it stuck like grit in my teeth. So I made a decision. I'd let her play her hand, and then I'd play mine. 2 weeks later, that opportunity came, and it came like a gut punch. I was in the mess hall when my phone buzzed. A notification from our shared bank account app. I opened it out of habit and froze. A transfer. $88,500. Gone. I set down my fork and stared at the screen. There had been $92,000 in that joint account just weeks earlier. Now the balance read $22.37. I checked the savings account, zero. All of it, every dollar we'd set aside over years gone. A wave of heat hit my face. Not rage, something sharper. Controlled. Murphy, another guy from my unit, leaned over. Bad news, just account stuff. I muttered, pocketing my phone. That night I stood in the long corridor outside the phone center, listening to the static buzz of a secured line as I called the bank. Kara had started moving money the day after I deployed. Small transfers at first. A few hundred here, a few thousand there. Then the big hits started rolling in tens of thousands sent to an account I didn't recognize. When the call ended, I stood in silence. Guys were laughing, calling home, video chatting with their wives and kids. And I was standing in the middle of a betrayal so clean it felt surgical. That's when Miles found me. He looked concerned. Heard from Alvarez that you looked like you'd seen a ghost at dinner. I hesitated, then spoke. My wife cleaned out our accounts and moved her boyfriend into our house. He let out a low whistle. Jesus. She sent the divorce papers by email. Last week. Miles didn't offer hollow sympathy. No man, that sucks, or you'll be okay. He just asked, what's your plan? I looked out toward the dark edge of base. Not sure yet. Well, he said, clapping me once on the shoulder, let me know if you need anything. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into our home security system, something Kara probably forgot I could still access. There it was, a strange black truck in our driveway. A man I'd never seen before walking scout, using my coffee mug sitting on the porch swing I built 2 summers ago. And then there was Kara, laughing in the kitchen I'd remodeled with my own hands. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not heartbreak, not even anger. It was focus. Laser clear, tactical focus. I pulled out a pen and made a list. First item, call Eli. I called Eli Cartwright from a secure line the next morning. Logan, he answered, his voice groggy but alert. It's time, I said. He didn't ask what I meant. Secure line. Yeah, talk. I gave him a summary Kara's email, the wiped out accounts, the security footage. The forged calm in my voice didn't fool him. Jesus, Briggs. She actually moved him in. Walked my damn dog, I said flatly. Wore my sweatshirt, used my mug. Silence on the other end. Then all right, here's what we do. Ely laid out the first steps, start documenting everything. Bank statements, transfers, security footage timestamps. He told me to back up everything on multiple devices and email them to him on a burner address he gave me. You need to stay calm, he said. This isn't about revenge. This is about control, tactical response. You hear me? I do. Eli wasn't just any lawyer. He'd been a platoon leader in Iraq before law school. The guy once neutralized a roadside ambush with nothing but a 9mm and a bag of sand. I trusted him with my life once. Now I trusted him with something even more fragile, my future. I spent the next week gathering evidence like it was a recon op, screenshots, video clips, bank activity logs. I had to use the base's patchy internet and sometimes bribe the IT guy with extra rations just to keep the connection stable long enough to send files. The more I gathered, the clearer the picture became and the uglier it got. Kara hadn't just drained our accounts. She'd refinanced our house, pulled out over $330,000 in equity, and I knew for a fact I hadn't signed anything because I was 7,000 miles away at the time. When Eli sent over the scanned refinance paperwork, my heart nearly stopped. There it was, my name, my signature. But it wasn't mine. At first glance, it was close. But I'd been signing that name the same way since I was 15. This one had my middle initial wrong, and the tail stroke on the G was off. She forged it, I muttered. She did, Eli confirmed. And get this, she listed her boyfriend Derek as a co-applicant. Derek, I repeated. That piece of work from the gym. You know him, I know of him. I said. Now I know way too much, Eli continued. Derek Mason, 2 DUIs, a fraud charge in 2019. Guy's been floating between jobs. Looks like he found himself a shortcut. I stared at the refinance documents, fingers clenched. She took a loan against my house. I said, each word a struggle, stole our savings, forged my name, and now she's living like none of it matters. Eli exhaled through the receiver. The good news, you've got a strong case. VA loans are federally backed. Forging a signature on one. That's not just fraud, it's a federal crime. I nodded slowly. So what's the move? We start with the bank. We meet with the officer who processed the loan. You bring your ID, your actual signature, and proof of deployment. Then we file a police report, notify the loan provider, and freeze the funds if they haven't all been dispersed yet. Then we wait. Eli said, we see who cracks first. 2 weeks later, I touched down at Spokane International under a false name. I didn't tell Kara, didn't even rent a car in my own name. Just checked into a cheap motel off I-90 and met Eli at a diner off Route 27. You look like hell, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. Feel like it too. He handed me a manila folder. Inside bank records, mortgage documents, and something new. This, he said, tapping the top page, is what's going to bury her. It was a notarized copy of the refinance packet. And then another document. This one wasn't from the bank. It was from the county recorder's office. A house listing agreement. She was getting ready to sell, I asked. Looks like it, Eli said. We pulled this from the records office. The listing agent, a guy named Travis Dalton, real estate license, has a history of working with your wife's new boyfriend. I blinked. This wasn't just Kara being reckless. This was coordinated. Starting to look that way. I leaned back in the booth, heart pounding. Kara had tried to erase me financially, physically, legally, forge my signature, cash out the house, sell it behind my back, and ride into the sunset with a guy who thought wearing another man's hoodie was a flex. But she didn't realize she'd just activated something far more dangerous than betrayal. She activated the part of me that handled insurgent operations and night raids. This wasn't a broken marriage. This was a battlefield, and I had the terrain advantage now. Eli looked at me. You ready for this to get messy? I was in Kandahar last month. This is nothing. He smiled. Then let's blow the lid off. The next morning, we headed straight to the bank where Kara had filed the refinance documents. I didn't bother dressing up, just a ball cap, jeans, and my old field jacket. The kind of attire that made people underestimate you. Eli had already made the appointment with the loan officer, someone named Denise Halpern, mid-40s. Polished, but with a nervous energy you could smell the moment we walked in. She met us in a small, glass-walled office. Mr. Briggs, she asked. I nodded. This your file? I handed her my military ID, my driver's license, and the real signature record from the DMV. Then Eli slid across a copy of the forged refinance document. She looked at it, then back at me, and then at it again, her face drained of color. I need to escalate this, she said, her voice thin. Already did, I said. Filed a police report this morning. Eli leaned forward, calm as always. We're here as a courtesy, but this isn't going away quietly. Denise nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she tapped her keyboard. The funds were dispersed 3 weeks ago, she said, but I'll notify the fraud team immediately, outside the office. I leaned against the wall and looked at Eli. She never expected I'd come home early. She never expected you'd be 10 steps ahead. That afternoon, Kara called for the first time since the email. I didn't answer. The voicemail was short. Logan, we need to talk. The bank just called. If this is about the divorce, can't we just handle this like adults? Those same words. Like adults. I smiled grimly. That phrase was her way of avoiding consequences. Eli sent a notice to the county clerk the next day, formally contesting the refinance on grounds of identity fraud. That froze any legal activity on the property sale, transfer, loans, all of it. We were closing in. The next morning, Derek Mason, the boyfriend, got pulled over driving my truck, the one still titled in my name. He was operating on a suspended license. The police impounded the vehicle and found something else while they were at it. Prescription pads from the dental office where Kara worked. They weren't blank. When Eli called me with the update, I was stunned. She's stealing controlled prescriptions, I asked. Looks that way, or helping someone else do it. That's felony territory, which is why I called someone I know at the state board. This might be about to blow wide open. I sat down on the edge of my motel bed, staring at the floor. Part of me wanted to call Kara, warn her, tell her to run, to come clean. But then I remembered the security footage, Derek in my house. Kara laughing in our kitchen, her hand on his shoulder. She wasn't innocent. And even if she wasn't the mastermind, she sure as hell wasn't just a passenger either. I met with the bank's fraud investigator the next day, a guy named Thompson, mid-50s, tired eyes, coffee stain on his tie. He didn't seem shocked by the story. This happens more than you think, he said, flipping through the paperwork. Spouse deploys. Other spouse gets opportunistic. What now, I asked. We've frozen the remaining funds, Thompson said, but about half of it's already gone. I leaned in. Where did it go? He hesitated. I'm not supposed to share that. It's my house, my name, my forged signature, my stolen money. He sighed, then turned his monitor toward me. Transfers, multiple, all to a name I didn't recognize, Travis Dalton. I sat back. Who's Travis Dalton? Thompson shrugged. Not my department, but you should ask your lawyer to subpoena his records. I didn't wait that long. As soon as I got back to the motel, I called Eli. Dalton. I said, multiple transfers, over 14 grand. Hold on, he said. Let me run it. 30 minutes later, he called back. Logan, he said, his voice tight. Travis Dalton's a real estate agent, specializes in cash closings and quick listings. And guess what? Tell me. He's closed multiple deals with Derek Mason in the last 2 years. 3, to be exact. I closed my eyes. My chest tightened. This wasn't just Kara leaving me for some guy at the gym. This was a predatory scheme. Derek targeted women tied to deployed military personnel, helped them liquidate assets, funneled money through shady real estate deals and moved on. And Kara, she was either a pawn or a partner. You sitting down, Eli asked. Yeah, I found 2 other women. Similar setup. Deployed husbands, homes sold fast, under market value. One of them ended up homeless. I felt something crack inside me. Not sadness, not anger, resolve. I want to go nuclear, I said. Eli didn't hesitate. Then we bring in the feds. By nightfall, Eli had already reached out to someone he knew at the FBI Special Agent Rivera from the Financial Crimes Division. We agreed not to call from my phone or email anything sensitive. Instead, we drove 40 minutes out to a small federal field office in the outskirts of Spokane. Agent Rivera met us in a back conference room, sharp eyes, blazer slightly wrinkled, calm but focused. This is bigger than a domestic dispute, she said after reviewing the documents. You've got forged federal loan paperwork, interstate financial transfers, and now a pattern of repeat behavior from Mason and Dalton. She glanced up at me. You may be our missing puzzle piece. She wasn't wrong. Over the next hour, I handed over everything: photos, videos, scans of every signature I'd ever legally signed, the recordings from the bank meeting, even the security camera footage of Derek walking my dog in his slippers like he owned the place. She jotted notes with surgical precision. Did Kara ever mention financial struggles, debt? Not to me, I said. She said we were house poor once, that we should downsize, but our mortgage was manageable, especially with my pay and benefits. She mentioned selling the house. Never. Rivera exchanged a look with Agent Harlow, a younger agent who'd quietly entered during the interview. He had a tablet out, scrolling through what looked like a map of property transfers. We've had Mason and Dalton on our radar for a while, Harlow said, but we never had enough to stick. You're the first military plaintiff willing to testify, and you've got hard evidence. I nodded. I want this to stop, not just for me. There are other families. There are, Rivera said. You're not the only one, but your case has the kind of detail we've needed. They asked me not to confront Kara directly, not yet. They needed to monitor communications, confirm transactions, and legally trace the money paths. Every word I said to her from that point forward could compromise the operation. Let us handle the bigger picture, Rivera said. You just keep documenting. That night, I went back to the motel with my laptop and opened the security feed again. And I waited. The next morning, Kara texted me again. Logan, please, we need to talk. Meet me at Riverfront Park tomorrow at 10 a.m. Just us. Eli and I had coffee at the greasy diner across the road. I showed him the message. Don't go, he said immediately. I'm not planning to, I replied, but I want to see who shows up at the house while she's gone. At 9:30 a.m., we parked 2 blocks away from my house. At 9:45, Kara pulled out of the driveway and turned west toward Riverfront Park. She thinks you'll be waiting for her, Eli said. She's about to be very disappointed. At 10:05, a white Ford SUV pulled up to the house. On the door, a logo for Dalton Realty Group. I leaned forward. Showtime. Travis Dalton stepped out in khakis and a blazer, holding a leather folder. Derek Mason came out to meet him. They shook hands and went inside like it was any normal Tuesday morning. Eli raised an eyebrow. We follow them, I shook my head. No need. I tapped my phone, opened the live interior feed, and turned the volume up. Travis was taking photos in the living room. Derek pointed out fixtures I installed during deployment leave cabinets. New flooring, a built-in bookcase Kara had once told me she hated. "I've got a buyer lined up already," Travis said. "Cash deal, quick close. We list at $470. They'll probably offer $420. "Good," Derek said. "We just need to be fast before her husband makes this messy." Travis scoffed. "Military guys always make noise but then roll over. He's not even in the country, right? Technically, no," Derek said with a smirk. Eli was already recording the audio from my phone. "Got it," he whispered. "This is everything." I typed a short message to Agent Rivera. "Happening now. Listing conversation recorded. Access granted to security footage." 28 minutes later, 3 unmarked SUVs pulled up to the house. FBI agents swarmed in with tactical efficiency. Travis and Derek were both let out in cuffs. I watched from the end of the street, hidden behind Eli's car, heart pounding not from nerves, but from the quiet, deliberate satisfaction of watching a scam fall apart in real time. Then Agent Rivera called. "We got it all," she said. "Discussion of fraudulent listing, awareness of forged documents, attempt to profit from illegal refinance. We're bringing formal charges, conspiracy, wire fraud, real estate fraud, and VA loan forgery." "What about Kara?" I asked. "She just showed up to the scene." Rivera said, "She's distressed." I looked toward my house. There she was, standing on the lawn in tears, hands over her mouth, watching as agents carried boxes of evidence out the front door. "What happens to her?" I asked. Rivera paused. "That depends on what she knew, and on what you want." I didn't answer right away, because in that moment, it wasn't just about Kara anymore. It was about all of us, every soldier who left a home behind in good faith, and everyone who came back to find it violated. I watched her, for a long while, from the shadows of a maple tree down the street, and I said nothing. The federal case against Derek Mason and Travis Dalton moved faster than I expected. When the FBI has you on camera discussing fraud, forgery, and financial schemes involving federal property, there's not a whole lot left to debate. Both men took plea deals within a week, each throwing the other under the bus. Classic, but the question that kept circling my brain like a vulture was this: what about Kara? I knew she wasn't the architect Derek and Dalton had been at this for years, with a paper trail that spanned multiple counties, but she wasn't a clueless bystander either. You don't forge a spouse's name, apply for a $330,000 refinance, and call it a misunderstanding. When I met with Agent Rivera again, she laid it out plainly. "We're still piecing together her involvement." She said, "What we do know is that she had access to your personal documents, your social security number, your deployment schedule, and she directly benefited from the fraud." I nodded. "So what happens next?" "We're freezing her financial accounts and pulling her phone records. Depending on what we find, she could be charged as a co-conspirator." It was strange hearing those words. Kara Briggs, co-conspirator. This was the same woman who once cried when I surprised her with a Christmas tree on base housing, who used to wait outside baggage claim with homemade signs when I came back from deployments. Now she was the person being investigated for identity theft and federal mortgage fraud. Eli and I spent the next few days working with Rivera's team. They built timelines, cross-referenced transaction histories, gathered testimony from other victims. Turned out Derek Mason had a pattern targeting women tied to military families, manipulating them into forging documents, selling homes fast and below market value, and pocketing the spread. Kara wasn't the only woman, but she was one of the few who still had something left to lose. One morning, I sat on the porch of the temporary apartment I'd rented. Scout, my German shepherd, lay at my feet, his ears twitching at the sounds of passing cars. I'd picked him up from a kennel the week before. He was thinner, a little skittish. Like me, he'd been through something. I got a call from Eli. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "The FBI dug into Dalton's files. They found names, at least 11 other families, all military, same playbook." I exhaled slowly. "They're going to get restitution if the DOJ gets its way." "Yeah, and you helped make that happen." Later that afternoon, Kara texted again. Logan, I didn't know it would go this far. I thought we were just taking equity we were entitled to. Derek said you were hiding money and planning to leave me with nothing. I stared at the message for a long time before replying with just 2 words. Who's Travis? She responded in less than 10 seconds. I don't know what you're talking about. I sent another message. 14 towels, $600 multiple transfers, listing contract, security footage. This time, she didn't respond. The next morning, Eli and I sat across from agents Rivera and Harlow again. You're officially listed as the primary witness. Rivera said, your footage, testimony, and bank records establish the fraud pattern. Mason and Dalton are facing over 20 years. Minimum. And Kara, I asked, she's being questioned as we speak. I didn't know what I wanted for her. Jail maybe, maybe not. What I really wanted was acknowledgement, an apology, something real to counterbalance the staggering betrayal. I never got it. But what I did get was something more important, the truth. The system broken, though it often has worked this time. And my story. It became a precedent. That night, I sat in the quiet of the apartment, scrolling through news headlines. Mason and Dalton's arrests had made regional headlines. Real estate scam targeted military families. FBI cracks multi-state fraud ring, and veterans' testimony leads to federal charges. I didn't feel heroic. I felt tired, but a little lighter too. Kara had betrayed me. Derek had tried to erase me. But they had underestimated one thing. I wasn't just a soldier. I was someone who knew how to endure, observe, and strike only when the moment was right. For 13 years, I had built a life with someone I trusted. And for the last 6 months, she had quietly dismantled it behind my back. But she forgot the foundation was mine. And no matter what she tried to take, she couldn't shake the part of me that refused to break. Not in Kandahar, not in Spokane. I hadn't seen Kara face to face since that airport goodbye months ago. The one where her hug had felt more like a handshake. But I saw her again, from a distance. It was late evening. I'd driven past our old neighborhood just once, just to see it. The maple trees lining the sidewalks were blooming, same as always. Kids rode their bikes in front yards. Sprinklers ticked in rhythmic arcs across lawns, and there she was standing in our front yard. Our lawn. Only it wasn't ours anymore. She was staring at the house like it was a crime scene, which, in a way, it had become. There were yellow tags on the front window, a padlock on the door. It was officially under investigation. She looked tired. Her hair was up in a loose bun, like she hadn't slept in days. Her body language had none of that proud posture she used to have, not the woman who once stood on that porch waving as I left for deployment. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't need to. Some ghosts are better left on the other side of glass. I parked a few blocks away and opened the security feed on my phone. Even though the FBI had access now, I still kept a mirror copy. The habit of covering my six had never left me. The last recorded video showed Kara packing up throwing boxes into her car, including things I hadn't seen in years. Old photos, books, scouts' toys. She was leaving, but it didn't look like escape. It looked like surrender. Eli called me 2 days later. Want the good news or the weird news? Let's start weird. The DOJ got a warrant to dig into the communications between Dalton and Kara. They found messages where Dalton refers to her as the next house. Mason replies with a thumbs up emoji. So they were passing her around like a chess piece. Pretty much. But that's not all, turns out. Dalton has ties to a shell corporation in Oregon. That's where some of the funds were being funneled. Money laundering looks that way. And the good news, the federal prosecutor offered Kara a deal. She's cooperating, giving up everything she knows. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared out the window of the rental apartment. The blinds were dusty. The air smelled faintly of old carpet and lemon cleaner. She's naming names. Yeah, Eli said. Emails, receipts, recorded conversations. She's burned the whole thing down. Why? Because she knows what's coming. Later that week, Agent Rivera called to update me directly. Kara's statement helped us crack open 2 more cases, one in San Diego, another in El Paso. Both identical setups deployed spouses, forged loans, fast sales, and men like Mason in the middle. She hesitated, then added, "You were the first one who kept records. The first one who didn't just walk away quietly. I didn't do it to be first. I know, but you saved people. Whether you meant to or not." There was silence on the line. Then I asked the question that had been eating at me for weeks. What happens to her? Rivera didn't answer immediately. She won't go to prison, not if she keeps cooperating, but she's lost her job, her license, her financial accounts are frozen. She's under supervision and legally prohibited from leaving the state, and she's being sued in civil court by 2 of the other families Mason and Dalton scammed. They want restitution. Good, I said, though it didn't taste like victory. That night, I went through a box of old photos, not to mourn, but to remember the full arc. There we were, Kara and me in our 20s, posing in front of the moving van. Kara with her first real paycheck from the dental office. Us at the beach. Us in front of the house with Scout. When he was still a pup, you don't erase 13 years with a forged signature. But you can learn from them. You can rebuild. The next morning, I made a decision. I called my CEO and submitted for early retirement. I had served 20 years. It was enough. The Army had been my anchor, my identity. But after everything I'd been through, I needed a different kind of mission, one that didn't require camouflage and a call sign. I needed to become Logan Briggs again, not Staff Sergeant Briggs. So I packed up what I had, loaded Scout into the truck, and drove 3 hours west to a sleepy little town tucked into the Cascade foothills. Population maybe 1,000. I rented a small cabin by a creek, no neighbors for a half-mile in either direction, no base nearby, no memory-laced houses, no local rumors, just peace, just stillness. I started doing woodworking again, fixing fences, sanding tables, crafting things with my hands. The VA pension covered what I needed. The rest was just for my sanity. For the first time in years, I wasn't listening for incoming fire. I was listening for birds. One of the first things I built when I settled into the cabin was a new bench for the porch. I'd picked up some rough pine boards from a sawmill on the edge of town, warped, split in places, full of knots. Useless to most, but I saw potential. It took me a week. I sanded the wood smooth, treated it with a dark walnut stain, and carved a simple inscription beneath the seat still standing. That bench became my sanctuary. Every morning, I'd sit there with a mug of black coffee, Scout lying at my feet, watching the fog roll off the hills. The quiet wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. There were no sirens, no alarms, no betrayal waiting in my inbox, just the slow return of self. And that, more than any legal victory, was the real healing. Still, the past had a way of knocking when you least expected it. One afternoon in late fall, I received a letter, real paper, handwritten, no return address, just my name. Inside, it was short, Logan. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I was weak. I let someone make me believe you were the enemy. I see now how wrong I was. I've lost everything, but I did it to myself. Kara, I read it once, then twice, and then I folded it and placed it in the drawer under the sink, next to the spare batteries and a can of WD-40. I didn't need to respond. The words weren't for her redemption. They were for closure, hers, not mine. My closure had come already, in the still mornings, in the sound of Scout barking at squirrels, in the way I slept through the night again, without dreams full of sand and steel. Over the next few months, I started taking on more work around town. I fixed up a local veteran's porch, helped a retired couple rebuild a collapsed chicken coop, and even taught a few teenagers how to use a lathe. People didn't ask many questions. They just knew I was the Army guy who built things, and that was fine by me. Eli called sometimes, mostly with updates. Derek Mason had been sentenced 8 years. no parole. Travis Dalton got 10, plus restitution. The feds were still investigating a third player, a financial advisor tied to the refinance paperwork, who may have knowingly facilitated the fraud. Kara. She'd taken a plea deal, avoided prison, but was required to testify in every single case involving the Mason-Dalton ring. Her name had become a cautionary tale in military support circles. She'd moved back to her hometown in Oregon, no job, no license, just a rented one-bedroom above a pizza joint. I didn't feel joy in hearing that, but I did feel a strange sense of justice. Because for all the hurt she caused, her greatest punishment wasn't legal, it was internal. She had to live with who she became. I didn't. My hands were scarred, but clean. One chilly evening, I got a call from Agent Rivera. She was working a new case. Similar MO, different state. "Your testimony's helping us train new agents," she said. "You gave us a roadmap. That's good to hear. And there's something else. We found additional victims, 5 more. All military. Your case gave them the courage to come forward." I swallowed hard. That was the moment I realized something. This wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was a story about resilience, about what happens when someone tries to erase you and fails. Kara had taken almost everything from me, but she couldn't take my discipline, my calm, or my capacity to rebuild. The very same skills I learned under fire became the tools I used to recover. And there's something profoundly powerful in that realization. People think strength looks like shouting in a courtroom or winning a fistfight, but real strength is what you do when you have every reason to burn it all down, and instead, you build a bench on your porch and inscribe it with the truth, still standing. I never told anyone the exact moment I decided to stop being angry. It wasn't some cinematic sunrise or spiritual revelation. No music swelling in the background. It was a Tuesday morning. I was sanding down a maple cabinet door for a widow in town. Her husband had been a Navy vet, passed from cancer the year before. She wanted the kitchen redone but couldn't afford a contractor. So I told her I'd help. As I worked, she brought me lemonade in a glass with a crack along the rim. "You remind me of him," she said, setting the glass down gently. He was quiet and carried things in his eyes instead of his mouth. I didn't reply, just nodded. But later, as I drove back home along the winding 2-lane road through the pines, her words followed me like a second heartbeat. I had been carrying everything in my eyes: anger, betrayal, shame, quietly, too quietly, and it hit me that my silence wasn't strength anymore. It was weight, so I let it go. Not for Kara, not for Derek, for me. Because I realized that rebuilding wasn't just about woodworking or new routines. It was about refusing to live like a victim in a story I had already taken control of. From that point on, I gave myself permission to breathe again. Not just exhale, but really breathe. Scout and I would hike the ridge trails every other weekend. Just the two of us. Sometimes I'd bring a book and a thermos and sit for hours on an overlook that watched the valley roll out like a green wave. I started keeping a journal not about the betrayal, but about small, quiet victories. The sound of fresh lumber cracking open, the first snowfall, the woman at the feed store who always slipped Scout extra treats. Life wasn't dramatic anymore, and I liked it that way. Eli came to visit once in January, bringing a 6-pack of cheap beer and a file folder of final case closures. "Your name's on a DOJ report," he said, grinning as we sat on the porch. "Yeah, Briggs v. Mason-Dalton Fraud Network. Used in financial crimes training materials." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't exactly aim for legacy. Sometimes it finds you anyway." We sat in silence, watching Scout chase a squirrel across the snowbank. Then Eli asked, "Ever think about writing a book?" A book? I laughed. "You lived through something most people would fall apart from. You kept records. You outmaneuvered a professional scam. You worked with the FBI. That's a hell of a story." "I don't know." I said, "Feels too close, too raw. Maybe that's why it matters." I didn't answer him then, but I thought about it. Not just for me, but for the guys I used to serve with. The ones who'd call from deployments, their voices heavy with worry about things back home. The ones who didn't see it coming. The ones who came back to empty houses and closed accounts and divorce papers filed in silence. I wasn't the only one, and maybe it was time people started talking about it. A few weeks later, I got another letter, this time from the VA. They were launching a new initiative, Operation Sentinel, a task force investigating predatory schemes targeting military families. My case had been used as the basis for the policy recommendations. I read the letter twice. Then I set it on the kitchen table and stared at it while the kettle boiled. Scout barked at a rabbit in the yard, and I smiled. Because this time, the system wasn't failing us. It was learning, just like I had when I left the Army. I wasn't sure who I was without the uniform, but now I was a man who survived betrayal, stood in the fire, and walked out carrying the evidence. I wasn't broken. I was seasoned. There's a difference. Spring came early that year. The snow melted faster than usual, the trails dried up, and the trees around my cabin began to bud with bright green life. For the first time in a long while, the air smelled like renewal, not like loss. One morning I was trimming back branches behind the cabin when I heard a car pull up. A silver SUV, rental plates. I didn't recognize it. Scout barked once, but didn't charge. He knew the difference between trouble and visitors. The door opened, and out stepped Agent Rivera. "Thought I'd stop by," she said, brushing pine needles off her blazer. "You're hard to find." "That's by design," I said, offering her a folding chair from the porch. She sat, glancing around. Nice place. Quiet. That's the goal. She handed me a manila envelope. Final case report, all sealed. Derek Mason pled out. So did Dalton. Kara's agreement held. No prison, but she's on a 7-year supervised release and prohibited from working in any field involving finance or healthcare. I opened the folder and skimmed the summary. There it was in black and white closure, notarized and signed. "You did something important," Rivera said. "This case set a precedent. You forced accountability into a space where it didn't exist. I didn't want to be anyone's example." I said, setting the file down. "Most people who make a difference never do." She stayed for half an hour. We talked about the other families helped by the investigation. One had gotten their house back after the sale was overturned. Another received a settlement from a bank that ignored red flags. As she stood to leave, she looked at me with something like respect. Not the kind you get from a title or a badge, but the kind earned through scars. "I think you've still got more to do," she said. "Not with us. Maybe, but somewhere." I didn't answer right away. But I thought about that after she drove off, her taillights disappearing down the long gravel path. She was right. I wasn't done yet. A few days later, I drove into town and pinned up a flyer at the local VFW Hall Veterans Workshop, Woodworking and Legal Basics for Home Ownership. Thursdays at 6 p.m. No cost. Come with questions, leave with answers, and maybe a new table leg. The first night, only 3 guys showed up, 2 Marines and a Navy vet, all over 50. One brought his son, who'd just gotten out of the Army and was trying to navigate VA benefits and his first mortgage. We didn't build much that night, just talked, swapped stories, shared dumb jokes. But when one of them pulled me aside afterward and said, "Thanks, man didn't know I needed this," I realized something. Sometimes justice isn't a courtroom. Sometimes it's a circle of folding chairs, sawdust in the air, and people realizing they're not alone. Word spread slowly. The group grew. A woman who served in Afghanistan showed up to learn how to fix her porch. An older vet brought his grandkid who wanted to learn how to use tools. We talked about loans, about scams, about trust and betrayal. Not everyone shared their stories, but everyone understood. One night, as I was locking up the workshop, I saw a familiar face waiting outside in the dark. "Eli, thought I'd drop by," he said. "Heard you started a little operation, trying to keep people from ending up where I did. You should turn this into a nonprofit," he said. "Could probably get VA funding." I'm not much of a paperwork guy, I said. He smiled. That's what friends with law degrees are for. And just like that, the next chapter began writing itself. We filed the paperwork a month later, still standing foundation, free workshops, legal resource guides, mental health contacts, even a hotline manned by local volunteers. It was small, grassroots, but it was real. And for the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to pain, I was building something from it. Every plank, every screw, every conversation became part of a new foundation, one that couldn't be forged, one that no betrayal could erase. 2 months after launching the Still Standing Foundation, we received our first official grant. It wasn't huge, just under $5,000, but it came with a handwritten note from a retired Air Force colonel. I read about your story. I've seen too many good men crushed quietly by betrayal. You turned pain into purpose. That's what leadership looks like. That letter hit harder than I expected. Not because it praised me, but because it acknowledged something I'd struggled to accept, that leadership isn't always found on a battlefield or in a boardroom. Sometimes it's found in showing up for people long after the smoke clears. I hung that letter in the workshop next to the wall of tools. It became a reminder not just of where I'd been, but of what could come from it. More people started showing up. Some came for the woodworking, others came for the company. Most came for the unspoken understanding that this was a space where your bruises didn't need to be hidden. There was Joe, a Navy vet who'd been scammed by his ex during a deployment to Bahrain. She'd sold his truck and emptied his retirement account. He never pressed charges, said it wasn't worth it. But one night, after the workshop, he pulled me aside and said, I wish I'd fought back. You give me hope that it's not too late to take some of it back. Then there was Amanda, a single mom who served in the National Guard. Her ex forged her name on a lease that tanked her credit. We walked through the process of contesting it. She cried when she saw the draft of the letter we helped her write. This feels like armor, she whispered. That was the moment I realized what we were really building. Not furniture, not reports, but armor. Legal armor, emotional armor, a support system forged from the same steel we were told to carry into combat, but this time wielded to protect what matters back home. One evening, I received a phone call from Agent Rivera again. You're becoming a bit of a legend, she said with a laugh. 3 more states have picked up cases that mirror yours. Mason and Dalton's plea deals opened floodgates. There's now a task force building a national database of these scams. About time, I said. I think they're going to ask you to speak at the annual Military Family Security Forum in D.C. I blinked. Me? You're the face of it now, Logan. Like it or not. I didn't say yes right away. I hated the idea of being a public face for anything. But a week later, I stood in front of a packed room at the forum, rows of uniformed service members, spouses, advocates, and government officials. I told them what had happened to me, not with bitterness, not with anger, but with precision. I explained how trust was weaponized, how systems failed, how I learned to protect myself and then help others do the same. The room was silent when I finished, and then applause. Not thunderous, not performative, just real. Later, an older woman approached me. Her son had died during deployment, and his wife had disappeared with his life insurance money. No one had investigated. No one had cared. I thought I was the only one. She said, "You're not." I replied, "You never were." After that, my inbox filled up vets, military spouses, legal teams, nonprofits. Everyone wanted to collaborate. Some just wanted to say thank you. It was overwhelming. Yes, but it was also grounding, because I never wanted a legacy. But if I was going to have one, I wanted it to be this. I stood up when it was easier to stay quiet. That fall, we moved the workshop into a bigger space, a donated warehouse on the edge of town. We added mental health workshops, partnered with a legal clinic from a nearby university, and started an outreach program for military members preparing to deploy. One of our new volunteers, Calvin, had just gotten back from his first deployment and helped design a pamphlet titled, "Before You Leave, How to Legally Protect Yourself." We printed 5,000 copies, By Christmas, they were being distributed at military bases across 6 states. And the best part, it wasn't just me anymore. There were dozens of us people who'd been burned and were now helping others build fireproof homes, both literally and metaphorically. This was no longer about Kara or Derek, or even about me. It was about making sure no one else had to get a PDF divorce in a desert with no support and no plan. It was about rewriting the rules and building a new kind of mission, one where we guarded hearts, homes, and futures together. The new warehouse space transformed everything. What started as 3 veterans with folding chairs and scrap wood became a fully functioning hub buzzing with hammers, low conversation, and the rhythmic hum of healing. We installed workbenches along the back wall, stocked toolkits donated by local hardware stores, and built a modest office space in the corner for intake and legal assistance. The place even smelled like resilience, pine sawdust, and coffee. We weren't just helping people anymore. We were training them to help themselves. One of the newer faces was Luis, a 28-year-old Army combat medic who had been stationed in Syria. He'd come back to find his apartment leased out under his name by a family member. Debt collectors were breathing down his neck. Credit shot. No one would rent to him. The first night he came, he didn't say much, just watched, observed. But by week 3, he was teaching a workshop on how to frame a wall. "Feels good to build something that doesn't fall apart," he said with a wry grin. I knew exactly what he meant. Another regular was Nina, a former Air Force mechanic. Her ex-husband had refinanced her house behind her back, forged her signature, and left her with $90,000 in debt. She showed up with her service dog and a folder full of receipts. We sat down and walked through each page together. "You're the first person who hasn't said, 'Wow, how did you let this happen?'" she said. "That's because I've been there. And I had." The thing about betrayal is that it makes you doubt your own vision, your instincts. It makes you second-guess the very trust you used to stand on. That's what makes it so paralyzing. It isn't just the loss of money or a relationship. It's the erosion of your internal compass. So we taught people to rebuild that too. Not with lectures or therapy buzzwords, but with hammers and drills and filing affidavits. We showed them that clarity comes through motion, through action. One evening, as I was sweeping up sawdust, I found myself standing in front of a finished table made by a 62-year-old Navy vet named Tom. He'd come in every week like clockwork, hands trembling with arthritis, but steady when they touched the grain. "This one's for my daughter," he said. "She thinks I'm just a broken old man." I looked at the craftsmanship, clean joinery, smooth finish. She's about to find out otherwise. That same night, I got an email from Agent Rivera. The DOJ had formally recognized the Still Standing Foundation as a model initiative. We'd be featured in their spring report to Congress on veteran reintegration programs. It was surreal. I remembered the moment I'd first read Kara's divorce email in Kandahar, how small I'd felt, how removed from control. And now, here I was, not just back on my feet, but helping hundreds find theirs. Eli came by the warehouse that week with something unexpected, a plaque, in recognition of Logan Briggs. For turning pain into power and building a new front line at home, he said it was from a coalition of military family legal advocates. I didn't want it on the wall at first, didn't want this space to be about me, but Nina and Luis and half a dozen others insisted. So we mounted it above the entrance, just under the American flag. And every time I passed under it, I reminded myself this wasn't my legacy, it was ours. That winter, we had our first Christmas potluck. People brought casseroles, tamales, cookies, and old Tupperware. We played music, set up a tree made from reclaimed barnwood, and exchanged handmade gifts. Someone gave me a belt with the word "Still Standing" etched into the leather. I didn't know who it was. Didn't need to. Because in that moment, surrounded by people who had every reason to stay broken but chose to build instead, I realized I had found my new unit. Not in uniform, but in purpose, in solidarity, in community. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't miss the battlefield. Sometimes I still wondered where Kara ended up. Not often, but the thought floated through, especially on long, quiet nights after the workshop closed, when Scout would curl up on the rug, and the only sound was the wind brushing the pine trees outside. Eli had told me she'd moved to a small town in Oregon. Last he heard, she was working reception at a clinic, nothing involving prescriptions or billing. Thanks to the terms of her supervised release, no social media, no photos, no contact, just a ghost of a life that used to be. And honestly, that was enough. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted distance, and I'd earned it. One weekend in March, I took a road trip, just me and Scout. No map, no schedule. We drove north along Route 20, where the landscape unraveled in wide open patches of farmland, snowy ridges, and rusted-out grain silos. It wasn't about going anywhere specific. It was about movement, about freedom. In one tiny town near the Idaho border, we stopped at a gas station where the clerk noticed my Army veteran plates and asked, "You part of that foundation thing I saw on the news?" "The one for folks who got burned?" I nodded. He smiled. "Glad someone's doing something. I got a cousin who came back from the sandbox. Wife left him while he was still in customs. Cleaned out everything. He didn't even know where to go. I gave him one of our new cards. Black ink on tan cardstock. Simple. Still standing foundation workshops. Legal resources. Brotherhood. He took it like it was gold." Moments like that reminded me how far the ripples had gone. Back at the cabin that night, I sat on the porch, watching the stars slowly claim the sky. The air smelled like firewood and fresh earth. Scout lay beside me, head resting on my boot, breathing slow and steady. I thought about my old self, the man sitting in a tent in Kandahar reading a 3-line email that shattered everything. The man who stared at bank app withdrawals like he was watching a silent robbery. The man who, for a few terrifying days, felt like his entire identity had been erased with a forged signature and a coward's betrayal. But I wasn't that man anymore. Now, I was someone who had faced the kind of loss most people couldn't name. Not just the loss of love, but of trust, of home, of the illusion that good faith guarantees good endings. And I'd survived. No, I'd built something out of it. Later that week, I got a letter forwarded from the workshop. It was from one of the other victims of the Mason Dalton scam, a woman in Texas whose house had been sold while she was deployed to Qatar. She wrote, "I didn't think anyone would believe me. Not my command, not my family, not even the lawyers I first contacted. But when I found your story, I realized I wasn't alone. Your fight gave me permission to start my own. Thank you for standing when the rest of us couldn't." I read that letter 5 times. Then I set it next to the plaque Eli had given me. That weekend, we held a candlelight event at the workshop. It wasn't religious, wasn't political, just human. Everyone brought a candle. We lit them for the people we'd lost homes, partners, peace of mind. Each flame stood for something taken, and each one was proof that light could still come from the worst kind of dark. I lit mine for the life I left behind, not to mourn it, but to honor it, because without that fire, I wouldn't have found this forge. And without this forge, I wouldn't have found the strength to help others shape their own resilience. That night, I stood with a group of men and women, each one carrying their own story of betrayal, and I saw something remarkable. They weren't victims. They were builders, survivors, guardians of one another. And I knew in my bones that we had created something that couldn't be stolen, faked, or forged. We had created a family forged in fire and tempered in truth. The next spring, we opened a second location. It wasn't fancy, just an old converted hardware store in Southern California, donated by a retired Marine who'd followed our story online. Said the place had been sitting empty since his wife passed. He wanted it to go to someone who wouldn't waste the wood or the pain. I drove down with Eli and Luis to help with the setup. We loaded the truck with tools, folding chairs, and a dozen starter kits for legal literacy and home ownership resources. It felt like packing for deployment, except this time. We weren't going to fight a war. We were going to stop one from ever reaching another doorstep. The night before the opening, We stood in the empty space, now swept clean and smelling of oil, sawdust, and lemon cleaner. Louise leaned against the table and said, "Did you ever think, when you got that email, that it would lead to—" This I looked around. No, I admitted. That email felt like a death sentence. But maybe it was something else. Maybe it was a blueprint. That morning in Kandahar, the one where I received Kara's cold, surgical email, I'd felt powerless, trapped, robbed. But standing in that second location, 1,000 miles from the ashes of my old life, I felt something else entirely constructive force. We held the first workshop that Saturday. 15 people came through the door. Some were vets, others were spouses. A few had never even served, but had loved someone who didn't been hurt because of it. One woman brought her teenage son, said her ex had tried to forge her name on a refinance while she was at nursing school. She'd fought back but was drowning in legal bills. That night, we paired her with a volunteer attorney and added her to the list for financial assistance. She cried not out of weakness, but from sheer relief. That kind of gratitude doesn't need words. It sits in the air like oxygen. The foundation was growing, and so was I. Every week brought more stories, some devastating, others hopeful, all of them deeply human. There was Tommy, a young Air Force mechanic whose wife took out loans in his name while he was at basic training. There was Keisha, a Navy spouse who came back from deployment to find her house sold and her identity stolen by her own cousin. There was Chris, a Coast Guard reservist who'd been gaslit into signing away parental rights during a mental health crisis. Each one had believed, for a moment, that they were alone. But they weren't, because we were here now. Still Standing had grown from a whispered name among betrayed veterans to a national movement. By the time fall rolled around, we had 5 locations in a partnership with 2 major credit unions offering free fraud screenings for military families. Law schools volunteered interns to help with case files. Therapists offered pro bono sessions for those who needed more than just legal recourse. It wasn't just a network. It was a shield, a net, a tribe. One night after a long day at the shop, I drove out to the coast alone. Scout sat in the passenger seat, his ears twitching at every turn in the road. We stopped at a lookout, wind howling, ocean below black and endless. I sat on the hood of the truck, wrapped in a flannel shirt, and looked up at the stars, and I said it out loud for the first time. Thank you, Kara. Not with bitterness, not with irony, but with clarity. Because sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you is the thing that burns down the old version of your life and makes space for the one you were always meant to build. Had she not betrayed me, I never would have known how resilient I truly was. I never would have known how many others needed someone to stand up first so they could follow. I never would have built this new kind of battlefield one without bullets, but full of victories. I wouldn't have healed the way I did, and I wouldn't have helped others do the same. So yeah, thank you. You tried to ruin me, but all you did was clear the ground for something unshakable. The 6th location opened in North Carolina outside Fort Bragg. We called it Echo Base, half as a joke, half in tribute to the hundreds of soldiers who came through those gates, some marching toward duty, others toward heartbreak. Fort Bragg had seen it all: deployments, homecomings, funerals, weddings, and betrayals tucked into shadows. We set up in an old firehouse turned community center. The building still had its original brick facade, cracked bell tower, and a giant bay door that now opened up to rows of workbenches, legal pamphlets, and coffee urns that never seemed to empty. Opening day brought in over 200 people. We had lines out the door, not for food, not for shelter, but for answers. The air buzzed with an unspoken mix of hope and weariness. People had seen too much and trusted too little. But there was something about walking into a room filled with others who knew not from books, but from bruises that changed everything. That night, after everyone had left, I stood alone in the middle of the main hall, staring up at the old rafters. My breath fogged in the cold air. I could hear the echoes of the day still vibrating in the wood, and I let myself feel it. Not pride, something deeper. Peace. For so long, peace had felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to pre-deployment barbecues, Sunday mornings in bed, scouts' paws thudding across the hallway. But this was real, because peace isn't always quiet. Sometimes peace is 30 people hammering nails into reclaimed boards, laughing about the worst year of their lives. Sometimes peace is reclaiming your last name on a title that was nearly stolen. Sometimes peace is the sound of a man finally saying, "She lied," and not being met with shame but solidarity. I went back to my cabin a few days later. I hadn't been there in weeks. The porch was covered in pine needles. The bench I'd built wore a fresh layer of dust, and Scout greeted it like an old friend, nose twitching with recognition. I lit a fire, brewed a cup of coffee, and pulled out the folder. The folder. The one I'd carried since the beginning. The one filled with copies of every document, the fake refinance, the bank withdrawals, the email from Kara, evidence, receipts, my playbook. I set it on the fire, watched it burn. Not because I needed revenge, because I didn't need reminders anymore. I had lived through the betrayal, and then I built something that would outlast every signature, every lie, every empty promise. That fire wasn't about erasing the past. It was about owning it, turning it into fuel. By the time the last page curled into glowing ash, I felt lighter, not empty clear. A few days later, I stood in front of our board of directors, veterans, lawyers, spouses, survivors, and shared the next step. Still standing isn't just a foundation anymore. I said, it's a movement. We've empowered over 1,000 families, but we've got work to do. I want to take this national, permanent. We voted unanimously to launch Still Standing National Network, a nonprofit with federal recognition, partnered with the VA, DOD, and 5 major law clinics. We'd write legislation, provide legal templates, offer free classes in financial literacy, divorce defense, homeownership protections, and fraud prevention, all tailored for military families. We'd train base legal officers on how to recognize and stop financial abuse, not just of soldiers, but their partners too. We weren't going to be a whisper anymore. We'd be a siren. As I left that meeting, I realized something that stopped me cold in the hallway. It had been over 2 years since I'd opened Kara's email in the desert. And for the first time since that day, I no longer thought of her when I introduced myself. I wasn't the guy who got divorced by email. I was Logan Briggs, founder, builder, protector, still standing. The following year, I was invited to speak at the Pentagon, not in uniform, not as Staff Sergeant Briggs, but as a civilian, as a survivor, as the founder of a foundation that now had offices in 12 states, a hotline staffed 24 hours a day, and a legal defense network stronger than most family courts could have imagined just a few years prior. I stood at the podium in a crisp gray button-down and jeans, no ribbons, no insignia, just my story and the weight of hundreds of others like it. I looked out at the audience generals, policymakers, senators, young enlisted troops, and their families, people who had the power to change lives with the stroke of a pen, and I told them what it had felt like, what it had really felt like, to sit in a desert with a PDF that shattered your world, to log into your bank account and watch years of sacrifice vanish in a string of digital theft, to see your home, your dog, your coffee mug, your sweatshirt used by a stranger who called your wife babe. I told them about how I didn't shout, didn't rage, didn't collapse. I planned, I documented, I fought back not with fists, but with facts. And then I built something, not just to save myself, but to save others. I ended with this. The military trains us for every imaginable enemy, but it doesn't teach us what to do when the betrayal comes from the person who was supposed to be your safe harbor. It's time we prepare our people for that battle too, because some wars don't wear uniforms, and some heroes fight with pens, not weapons. After I finished, there was silence. Then, slow applause. Then faster. Some stood, not because of what I said, but because of what we had done. Together. The months that followed brought rapid change. The DoD adopted new protocols for spousal financial monitoring during deployments. The VA added an early fraud alert system tied to benefit accounts. Banks across the country began flagging suspicious real estate transactions involving VA loans. And the still standing foundation. We went global. A retired Army major who'd relocated to Germany opened a branch on base at Ramstein. Soon after, someone in Okinawa. Then a partnership with a UK-based military family support network. We were no longer just a program. We were a shield. I returned to the cabin that fall. The leaves were fiery orange and red, blanketing the ground like nature's own version of a medal ceremony. Scout, older now but still full of purpose, sat beside me on the porch, his muzzle grayer than before. I scratched his ears. Still with me. Huh, old boy. He wagged his tail. I thought about Kara, not with hate, not even with sadness, just perspective. She had been a chapter, a long one, painful, unforgiving, but not the whole story, not anymore. I walked down to the creek behind the house, sat on a rock, listened to the water babble over stone, and I allowed myself to feel proud, not for surviving, but for choosing again and again not to let betrayal define me, for turning the silence of a desert tent into the roar of a movement, for being the kind of man I would have wanted to meet when I was at my lowest. The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker tapped rhythmically. I smiled, then stood, brushed off my jeans, and walked back toward the cabin I had built with my own hands, still standing, still building, still ready for whatever came next. What began as a betrayal in a desert evolved into a movement that transformed lives. Logan Briggs, once a staff sergeant blindsided by a cold, calculated divorce and financial ambush while deployed, chose not to let devastation define him. Instead, he turned betrayal into blueprints, loss into leadership, and pain into purpose. Through quiet preparation, focused documentation, and the help of allies like Eli Cartwright and Agent Rivera, Logan dismantled a multi-state fraud ring targeting military families. But his most powerful decision wasn't just about justice, it was about what came after. He founded the Still Standing Foundation, a grassroots initiative that grew into a national network offering legal support, emotional recovery, and practical skills for veterans and their families who'd been exploited or abandoned. From workshops and legal templates to community-led healing circles and fraud prevention training, the foundation became a shield for the unseen battles faced on the home front. Logan didn't rebuild the life he had. He built a better one rooted not in the illusion of security, but in resilience, authenticity, and communal strength. By sharing his story, he gave others permission to stand up for themselves, to name their betrayal, and to reclaim their lives with dignity. And in doing so, he exposed a systemic failure and helped correct it. Because in the end, Logan didn't just survive betrayal, he built something that could never be stolen again. Not by deception, not by silence, not by fear. And he proved something deeply human, that sometimes the fiercest warriors aren't the ones who fight overseas, but the ones who come home, break apart, and build something unbreakable from the pieces. He is still standing. And now, so are hundreds more.